Hello everyone, today we are looking at a game from Sarajevo, 1987 between Grandmaster Ivan Sokolov and Rafael Vaganian with the black pieces. Now this is a continuation of our series on the Queen's Gambit Declined Exchange Variation. This is going to be the third video from the black side, countering White's ideas or common ideas in the Queen's Gambit Decline Exchange Variation. So in this particular game, we're going to look at White's play here after the exchange, of course, where he just simply plays f3 and castles on the king side. The last video we looked at the ramifications of white castling on the queen side, which is definitely a possibility. For instance, in this position where black has already committed his king. All right, so that is a dangerous variation that black should definitely be aware of. But if you're confident and you want to castle king side anyway, you can do that. But notice here in this position that the option is open for white at some point to play queenside castle and then go with the typical plan of h3-g4 etc. on the king side. So if you're looking for a fight, that's definitely the way to go. However, we looked at one of black's remedies for that, which is basically simply enough, is just waiting for white to castle. Okay, there's no rush to castle in these positions like this. But anyway, in this video, we're gonna look at the more classical approach where where white just castles kingside here. And again, Ivan Sokolov has the white pieces and Rafael Vaganian the black pieces. One of the famous Queen's Gambit decline experts. So we have this symmetrical castling. It's not a big deal. One thing I'd like to tell you is Max Erver once said that in his book, The Middle Game, speaking of symmetrical positions, and he said when positions are symmetrical, it's of utmost importance to gain the initiative. That's usually what will decide the game if it's not going to be a draw. It's just whoever can basically get one step ahead of the opponent. Now this position isn't exactly symmetrical because of white's pawn preponderance in the center. Alright, so but it's close enough to where there's not really a lot going on in the position as far as imbalances are concerned. So here after castles, Vaganian plays knight f8. Typical play. Developing the final piece in the position, rook a1, knight g6. So notice again, black is fortifying his king side. His king side is very secure. Again, another plan that white could have chose is rook b1 followed by b4, b5. Again, we've discussed that from both sides already. So knight g3, and what this does, besides putting more pressure on this square right here in f5, it puts more pressure on e4. Okay, so notice now you have five pieces supporting this advance. Okay, and by keeping the f file clear, this allows for this move f3 e4, and white wants to create a dynamic double pawn mobile center, right, in order to drive the black pieces away that all congregated around the king and create dynamic possibilities on the king side. Bishop d7, f3, rook c8. So these type of positions I like to look at. It's kind of like almost like a Spanish torture type position, because black is very solid but doesn't have in this position a lot of active possibilities. Okay, he's kind of just basically has to kind of wait and see what white's going to do, and then kind of look for counter chances. All right, so he's very solid but doesn't have a lot of dynamic potential in the position. So white jumps into f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, and now rook c7. King h1 is played. All right, just getting the king off of the diagonal when the b6 h1 g1 diagonal opens. So a6, and now e4. Okay, d takes e4, f takes e4. So now we have a big imbalance in the position where white has these this potentially dangerous pawn duel in the center. Again, whose purpose and idea is to drive the black pieces away from the defense of the king side. All right. Now notice these pawns are not isolated but hanging. All right, hanging pawns and isolated pawns are cousins. All right, and the style of play is basically the same as applied to both. The person who possesses the hanging or isolated pawns must play in a dynamic fashion, right? Can't really rest on his laurels because statically the position is weak. You have three separate pawn islands, and as the pawns are not attached to each other, they have to be protected by pieces. Okay, so that tells us that they can become a liability. All right, so if these pawns are fixed in any way, all right, can't move anymore, they just become a liability and uh, and a burden for the player who possesses them. However, if you're able to gain an initiative, all right, these pawns can be very powerful. They can be used in sacrificial situations, right? They can be used to drive away the opponent's pieces. They can be used to create wedges in the position. And also, another benefit of having such pawns is that they create open files. Notice you have the semi-open C file and the open F file in the position. All right, so very dynamic and dangerous position. Okay, for the player defending, and his job is basically to hold down the fort, weather the storm, and try to exploit these weaknesses, static weaknesses rather, in the position. All right, and basically judiciously trade off pieces and then exploit the leftover weaknesses in the ending usually. Okay, so again, this is what black's overall general umbrella plan is to try to just kind of weather the storm, hold out and exploit the weaknesses later on. All right, so as you can see here, it's black to move. The pawn is hanging on d4, but it's just a pawn sacrifice. Again, white is playing in dynamic fashion. This is actually a good sacrifice. So queen takes d4, and now Sokolov plays bishop e3. Another variation that was good to play is bishop takes f6, and this is just show you some of the dynamic possibilities in the position. So if bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6. Okay, if queen takes f6, then the powerful move e5 is available in the position, as well as the move knight d5. Notice the precarious position of the rook here. e5 is also very strong. The queen is in a bad position opposed to the rook like this. So for instance, you did a dumb move like that, knight takes e5, then just simply bishop takes h7 check. Just to give you an example of the possibilities in the position. So that's why his pawn sacrifice was actually pretty good by Sokolov. Instead, he played bishop e3, attacking the queen. The queen just went back to d8, and now rook d1, utilizing the open file. So white has to definitely step it up because now he's down a full pawn. Queen b8, and now bishop takes g6. Now, again, generally, if you have the isolated pawn, you want to try to preserve the pieces. For the most part, unless you have some kind of concrete continuation here whereby you can gain an advantage. Now, what Sokolov is thinking here is to eliminate this knight because this knight is protecting f4, and he wants to bring his bishop here and just basically win this rook. However, Stronger was to just maintain the pair of bishops here and play the move bishop b6 because the rook can't go anywhere anyway. Okay, so you get the same effect in the position. You see, there's nowhere for the rook to go. So after he takes on g6, he kind of diminishes his attack somewhat. So bishop takes g6, h takes g6, and now bishop f4, bishop d8, bishop d6, queen c7, and now he takes. Okay, so white is down a pawn. He still has attacking chances. He still has a good good potential in the position, and he has the exchange also. All right, but the game is up for grabs here. Rook f3 was played. Queen d3. Rook e1. Knight g4. h3. Knight goes back. Rook f3. And remember what I was saying about the isolated pawn, how it has to be protected by pieces. g5. Knight e2. Knight takes e4. And now also queen takes a2 could have been played. But let me show you the problem here. Knight takes e4. Now king g1. And now f5 solidifying the knight. So even though black is down the exchange, the knight is very, very strong here. And the rooks aren't really able to utilize the open files at this point. Okay, and he just dropped, basically dropped another pawn. So at this point, white is busted. Okay, he has just given up too much material at this point. A move like queen d4 may have been a little better here. So after f5, knight d4. Again, Sokolov is trying to, play in some dynamic manner here. Knight f3, rook to e6, queen takes d5, c takes d5. And remember what I was saying. Excuse me. One of black's goals earlier was to weather the storm, trade down to the ending, and exploit the weaknesses. So now, yes, black is down the exchange, but he's up 2 pawns here. Knight g5. Knights come off, but now again, look who has the protected pass pawns in the middle of the board. King h1 to avoid the pin to bishop b6. b6, bishop b6. And the reason why I chose this game also is to show the irony of what happened with the hanging pawns in the center of the board. First, white had the hanging pawns, but his pawns were stopped and captured. Now black has the hanging pawns, and now you see the difference. That his pawns are mobile and become very strong. Look at those pawns just marching up the board under protection from the bishop and king. And like I said, this beyond the scope, but I just wanted to show you the what happened at the end of this game. So you saw the triumph of black's hanging pawns in the center of the board over white's hanging pawns. Sorry, and after bishop c3 check, Sokolov was forced to resign. But again, going back to the scope of this video, how do you deal with white's classical plan of just castling kingside and playing f3, e4, so forth? Remember that hanging pawns will arise on the board, and you have to put in all the typical measures for playing against and defending against hanging pawns. Remember, the player with the hanging pawns has to play in a dynamic, attacking, nature where piece sacrifices, pawn sacrifices may be involved. The pawns must stay mobile. If you're playing against the isolated pawns, you must pile up pressure on the isolated pawns in order to force the opponent to use his pieces to protect them. In other words, you want the opponent to have to waste his resources in defense. Okay, because he wants to attack. He has the hanging pawns. He wants to push those pawns forward, drive your pieces away, and use them for attack. You want to attack those pawns and put pressure on the pawns, so he's forced to use his attacking resources as defensive mechanism. Then, while you're attacking, you want to make sure you can fix those pawns where they can't move. Once they can't move, they just become static liabilities. Okay, and then you can either win them or force them to advance them in a way, right, that weakens the pawns, and you can occupy the leftover squares. All right. So, and then of course, judiciously trade down the pieces, and then when it's safer, then you can exploit these weaknesses in the potential end game. So that is it for the survey on the Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. I looked at the three most common um, uh, um, plans for white and their antidotes for black. I might show one or two more videos just showing some miscellaneous stuff. Where black, matter of fact, I think I'll do one more video showing a few of miscellaneous responses from black. Some things that you could use as black as far as like a surprise that are pretty good to use. And if you don't counter Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation that often, is something that you can use that you might catch your opponent that plays it off guard, because it's rare but sound at the same time. So with that, I hope you like that video. Please like and subscribe. Check my links below. Please support my channel via donations. That would be greatly appreciated if this channel is being good for you and your chest. And also check the links below. There's videos, DVDs rather, and books about the Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. So I'll see you guys on the next video.